Welcome to Voice of Champions, guys. I'm so excited today that I am joined by Saran. She's coming all the way from Canada, but you will also hear as she speaks, she's got this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful accent because she's originally from Jamaica. And I know, like, I'm talking about accents, like I don't have an accent, but I love hers. So I'm going to mention it. And today we are here to discuss just how to live in sync with yourself and with your menstrual cycle and all of those things in the mix. It is such an interesting topic that we're about to delve into today. And I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. Saran, I am going to jump straight into question one, if you don't mind, and ask you just to tell us a little bit about who Saran is and why you're so passionate about this issue.
Thank you, first of all, for having me. This is like an incredible opportunity to speak to you today. I know in our previous conversations, the conversation just slowed, so I'm really happy to join you. So a little bit about me. My name is Saran James-Vaughan, and I am an island woman, but I live in Canada. I live in Toronto, and I'm a menstrual health educator and wellness coach, culture curator. There's lots going on there with me, but I'm really passionate about holistic wellness and bridging that gap between ancient practices and traditional wisdom and how that can help us live a more vibrant and healthful life. My focus is on menstrual health because after, a career in food service and then going to university and kind of being in that service industry, having my own children and, really reflecting on my own health and well-being, and deciding after the birth of my third child to go back to school to study holistic nutrition, really noticing that the thing that was driving a lot of women's health issues was hormone related. And noticing how much of an impact these kind of pesky, quote unquote, menstrual symptoms were, and really exploring what the root is, what the underlying meaning of all of these things were, and coming to the understanding that it wasn't just someone not eating well or not having a balanced diet. It wasn't just that they were stressed, although that's a really big part of it, but it's really, there's an emotional element, there's a spiritual element, and really trying to support women through that journey of healing. And just, as you mentioned, living in sync. I started looking at my menstrual cycle in a very different way around 2016, 2017. Things started to change, as you get a little bit older. I'm not that old, but I just noticed subtle differences and wanted to investigate and really started to pay attention. And when I started paying attention, I started to learn about my own body and the innate wisdom that was coming through the menstrual cycle. So I started doing more research and really kind of came into this just a wealth of personal and just, I'm a bit of a nerd, so went down many rabbit holes and coming to a whole system of understanding the self through the menstrual cycle.
I love that so much. And especially when you mentioned, like old wisdom and old kind of medicine. And you also use the word holistic, which I think is so important for this conversation. And I want to make sure that everybody who's watching at home understands what you mean by this, because you mentioned that quite a bit, that you use a holistic approach to menstruation and periods and even healing and any other kind of health related issues to that. So what does that holistic approach actually mean? When we hear that, what should it actually trigger our mind to thinking?
So oftentimes a more Western idea of how the body works is to compartmentalize everything. So, we don't necessarily see that our mental, emotional health is actually impacting our menstrual cycle, or that, the things that we put on our skin or what we're eating or, not living in the natural rhythms of things. we don't necessarily think these things are all connected. So when you are looking at health from a holistic perspective, you are not just isolating the disease and the symptom. You're looking at root causes and how all of the organ systems are interconnected, and that the fact that all the organ systems have a particular energy connected to it as well. And when you start to look at life and your body more holistically, now you're seeing yourself as part of something greater than. Like you're not just seeing yourself as just a machine with different parts. All these parts are working together. And if there's one part that is not working well, there's a likelihood that there's something else that is imbalanced. So when you're looking at healing holistically, it is really about bringing back a sense of balance or homeostasis to the body, to the mind, and to the spirit. So we know that having spiritual connection is going to help as well. We know that body awareness is going to ground you. We know that emotional intelligence is going to be driving a lot of the way in which you process things through your body, because a lot of times disease forms because emotions get stuck. We don't take the time to really move through those challenging emotions. We kind of push it aside. The logical mind says, okay, we can't deal with this right now for whatever reason. And then that energy in motion, emotion gets stuck in the body and creates harm and disease. So living holistically is paying attention to all the parts and bringing all of it into balance.
Let's just say that again. So looking at it holistically is looking at all of the parts of the whole and living in balance. You see, when you said root cause, I immediately understood that because of my business analysis background and my sort of project efficiency. And we know how important it is to really get to the root of the issue of something, especially in corporate, to ensure that it's working right, that you're getting rid of those bottlenecks that would cost you money, cost you resources, cost you time. So it's equally as important to make sure that you're looking at your entire system. And I love that you do that you're looking at a woman's system and health as a whole, taking into consideration all of those parts that you mentioned. You mentioned physical well-being, mental well-being. You mentioned how many emotions come into play with it as well. And I think that is so important, because how often are we told that, oh, it's fine, she's just PMSing, or, oh no, listen, it must be the time of the month for her. And there's this negative connotation to when a woman goes through her cycle, right? We're told we're either quite emotional or, but there's negative connotations to it, or these stigmas that come around to it. But all that says is, okay, there is an imbalance that's going on. So like, what's your take on PMS as it stands in that way and the way that it is perceived? Should that be something that we should be ashamed of? Should it be something we should be worried about? Or should it be something that we actually should be embracing and saying, okay, I actually am going through this process, through this cycle, and this is what my thinking needs to be around it?
So I really think that PMS is an opportunity. I think a lot of women are in this place where we wear the superhero cape, and we're in a place of trying to accommodate a lot of the time, and we're taking care of so many things. And the PMS phase or the luteal phase is an opportunity to kind of put the load down and say, I don't want to do it right now, and I don't care what you think about that. It also gives you the opportunity to process those things that you were not able to for whatever reason. So if you have unprocessed grief, or if you have unprocessed anger, those things are going to be amplified in your premenstrual phase. So if you notice that you're particularly angry, then you need to start, it's a signal that you need to pay attention to some unprocessed anger. And it may not be something that was in your current cycle. And I can talk a little bit about how you can look at the different cycles. It may not be anger that manifests within the current cycle. It may be something that is stemming from much deeper, whether it's in your childhood or whether it's intergenerational, and it's coming up for you to work through and to heal. because we understand how epigenetics works. We understand that we have genetic predispositions to certain energies, and sometimes we come into these bodies to work those things through, right? They're already in orbit bodies. We were already born with a predisposition, right? So it gives us an opportunity. So I always see the PMS phase as that time, as an opportunity to pay attention, to turn inward, and to really see where you need to kind of navigate things differently. It's also the only challenge that obviously comes with that is having that awareness and removing that stigma that people have. So for me, for example, I'm an introvert generally speaking, but particularly in my premenstrual phase, I don't really want to talk to anybody, and that's okay. For me, I know what that is. I know what it means. I know what it is I need to work through. So you need to be able to sometimes communicate that to the people around you. One of the things that can be quite challenging is the loss of perspective that happens in the premenstrual phase. So because you're, especially if you have a nervous system that is more sensitive, it is harder to access the left brain, the logical mind. And I think you're actually not really meant to during that phase. I think you're actually meant to let the emotions move through. That's why a lot of women end up feeling like, oh, as soon as day one of the period starts, it's like I feel a relief, or I feel totally different, like something, I don't know what that was. You hear a lot of those stories. And then the other thing to consider is that it can be severe in some women. So some women have PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which really is an amplification of those mental health issues around the 10 or so days leading up to the start of a new cycle.
Okay, so I don't know if you were really paying attention to my face as you were talking, because it was just like so many things that were like, oh my gosh, yes. I wrote, I don't think I could write fast enough, because I am taking notes to what you're saying, and I want to make sure that I'm covering all of these interesting and intricate things that I'm also hearing for the first time. But one of the things that really resonated a lot with me, and I wrote it down and I underlined it so many times, was self-awareness, right? It, like you mentioned that, and I thought to myself, that is so important, because when I start my cycle, you're aware. I think every woman kind of knows now what's going on with her body during that time. So you can sense that it's coming a couple of days before. And already I always feel like my energy levels kind of plummet. And I want to like hermit myself. I don't really want to talk to anybody. I don't want to do anything, but we force ourselves to push through, and we force ourselves to still behave like we're not on our cycle. It's like, lest anybody know that I am feeling this way or I'm doing this because I'm on my cycle. It's like, I don't want anybody to know I'm bleeding. But also, I think it's that superhuman complex that you mentioned. And I think that's so important, especially when it comes to talking to women in particular. Last year was a really difficult year for all of us, I think. And I think it was compounded by COVID-19. And I was having one of those, like I really needed to learn how to self-regulate, because I started my own business. I left corporate and I was working from home. So I had to manage my own time. And my entire sort of system was disrupted, right? I didn't have those normal triggers of I'm going to work now and my day is over. I'm on the road, I'm on the highway. Now I can stop my brain from thinking. I can rest my body. So it was a tough year for me. And I feel like I was just like going through everything. And my husband said to me once, he said, you just need to stop. You're not Superwoman and you're not meant to do it all, and it's okay. And I think it's so important that you're bringing that into this. We're having a conversation about menstrual health and our cycles, but I think it's so important that you brought self-awareness into it, that you brought the fact that it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to rest and to feel what you need to feel, and to allow yourself, and I think you said to allow yourself to go through the emotions of everything. And I tell you now, Saran, that I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to start looking at my cycle as an opportunity for me to just allow my emotions to flow and feel what I need to feel, and not feel like I have to just constantly be on. And I think that's an important takeaway from what you said. But you also mentioned phases of a cycle. And you're right. I think that's an important thing that we need to get to. So do you maybe just want to explain to us the different phases of a period that perhaps we are completely not aware of?
So the way I like to explain the phases of the cycle is matching it to the seasons. And really, I think this is a really great way of understanding it, because you understand the energy of seasons, particularly if you live in climates where you see the changes seasonally. I don't know to what extent you get that in South Africa, but here in Canada, we definitely feel when it's summer, when it's spring, winter, fall, like it's very distinct phases. So we have the menstrual phase, which kind of aligns into that winter feeling, right? So you're more reclusive. If you think about what you want in the wintertime, you want to be warm, you want to be kind of cozy, you want to have the warm soups and the warm teas, and you want to feel that comfort, and your energy is really more inward, right? There's not a whole lot of activity happening. And so during your menstrual cycle, that first, especially like day 1, day 2, your energy levels might be lower. This is really, this is the shedding of the lining, the uterine lining. And for some women, there's a lot of blood loss. There's menstrual cramps, so you want to do things that support yourself through that time. The next phase, so that's a menstrual phase. And then you have the follicular phase. So this is when things are going to be starting to pick up. Your hormones now start to rise, your estrogen levels, everything starts to pick up. And that really corresponds with spring. So if you think about the energy of spring, everything is kind of new, budding after a long winter, teeming with life. The potential is starting to actualize. So you're now going to see your energy slowly starting to build. If you were feeling low mood, that you're moving out of that, you're feeling this renewed sense of energy, of being, of vitality building. And then you get into the ovulatory phase, where this is like the peak of summer. So if you think about a flower in its fullest expression, in full bloom, magnetic, attractive, that is the ovulatory phase. This is when the egg is released and is really ready and waiting and open, receptive to the spark of new life from the follicular phase, right? So that is the energy of the ovulatory phase. Typically, this is when you see the peak in certain hormones like estrogen. You see serotonin, even the mood boosting hormone is at its highest peak. You feel on top of the world, right? And then you move into the luteal phase, which it corresponds to fall. So the energy starts to, if you think about the leaves on a tree now, so you have the full expression with the flower and the fruit, and now the energy is moving down. So you see the chlorophyll leaving the leaves, because the energy is actually moving down into the roots of the plant. So the energy is in and down. So this is when you see sometimes the mood is starting to change. The energy is starting to shift, it's more reflective. This is the luteal phase, when the hormone levels of estrogen drops off, serotonin drops off, progesterone picks up. It should, if you have balanced hormones, to help kind of navigate the drop off of serotonin and estrogen, right? And then but this energy is more inward and down, it's more reflective, right? So when you start to pay attention to your cycle, you notice yourself starting to do this. It also corresponds with the moon cycles. So the moon is not full every single night, right? If your cycle aligns with the moon, mine does. So I am at this point in my life, I am a full moon bleeder. When I was having my children, I was a new moon bleeder, right? So you can see your energy shifts again, just like the moon. And I would sometimes say this to folks, like, you see the moon, like, just think of it like a battery, the battery life, right? when it's full energy, you know, when it's not, when it's empty, when it's void, that indicates the energy level, right? So it's similar, very similar to the moon cycles, to the seasonal cycles, which is why it is so important to be attuned, because we are just reflecting what is already happening in nature.
That is incredible. I was just thinking now that we're going to need to bring you back just to discuss the phases of the period in more detail, because I think unpacking that in more detail is crucial. Like when you said spark to new life, I must say I love the language that you use to explain and describe what's happening to us when we're menstruating. It's so beautiful to hear, right? Because we don't often hear such positivity that's spoken about our cycles. Often we hear words that really denote to shame, you know, to hiding away. You know, we hear a lot of taboos. In a lot of conversations I've been having with other champions, we've heard so much about the cultural stigma and the heaviness of that, where girls are forced to literally be isolated from the family when they're on their cycle. So we know that there's a lot of negativity that surrounds our menstrual cycles. And to hear you talk about it so beautifully, it's just like so energizing. And I know I'm one of those, I'm taking it all in, Saran. I'm one of those people when I'm excited, I actually kind of like, it's almost like a woo-saw moment, because I'm taking it all in. And I don't want you to think that my energy level has dropped with you, because it hasn't. It's just that what you're saying is so beautiful that I think it deserves a moment. And I hope that, you know, those that are watching this kind of get that sense too, and start to appreciate their cycle for what it is, right? That it, and you said it, you keep saying it, self-awareness. Let's be more attuned to this, because if we understand it better, we will actually be able to be a lot more attuned to it. And if we start to talk about it the way you're talking about it, surely we will generate a period positive world. There's no other way around it. I do want to ask you now, though, you mentioned energies, and I want to find out from you, you know, is there an energy to what we're going through, right? You're mentioning energies quite a bit, and we've spoken a little bit as well before this conversation. But how important is it for us to understand both the feminine and the masculine energy when it comes to our cycle?
Absolutely. So we do have masculine energy within our own cycles, those 4 phases that I mentioned to you. The energy manifests very differently. So even in that first half of the cycle, the energy is actually more masculine. It's very outward, up and out. And then the second half is more in and down, right? So we get a chance to balance. When we have imbalance, we actually see hormonal imbalance. So looking like higher androgens, which is your male hormones, right? When we actually are not living in sync. So some of the diseases that come out of high androgens include PCOS, which is very common these days. So how much of your energy is up and out and not enough in and down, right? How much of your energy is not now more reflective and introspective? How much time are you really spending processing your emotions and working through especially the challenging ones? We all feel joy, and most of us, I would say, not everyone, but most people, I think, probably have a pretty good relationship with joy. We have no issue with laughing and expressing, and, you know, especially when we're around people that we care about and, you know, things are good and happening. Those emotions are typically easier. But when it comes to sadness, grief, and anger, fear, okay, that emotion is really challenging for most of us. And how much time are you spending trying to fight it? We try to fight it all the time. So there's this kind of stigma that comes up where it's like, the energy that I'm feeling right now, I feel really depressed. I feel depressed in my second half of my cycle. And I will never forget, there's this, I saw an interview with Jim Carrey, and he said that depression is really a call for deep rest, right? And it is the soul really saying it's tired of the carrying the character that it's been wearing, basically. And we don't really give ourselves that opportunity to do that. But I feel very fortunate in the sense that we have a built-in mechanism to do this. And when we start to see it that way, our lives start to change. Even the timelines start to change. The way that our lives unfold start to become more expansive, and you see a lot more deeper meaning. You're actually more spiritually connected to spirit, connected to divine, right? When you start to have a relationship like this with your cycle. And you touched on something around being separated from family. And this might be an unpopular thought, but I actually don't see anything really wrong with that, in the sense that sometimes it is such a deeply sacred and spiritual time that you're so sensitive to energy around you, meaning the veil is so thin that other people's energies can easily affect you. So if you are spending some time alone with yourself, or even with people who understand that time period. So if there's, for example, a red tent, you have your aunties and your mom, and she's making you tea and giving you the comfort and support that you need, that's different. Sometimes if you have people to hold a space in that way, but you're kind of away from everything, it's okay. What makes things really challenging is when you're extremely sensitive and you're around people who are maybe not able to process their own emotions, so you take that on in that time. That can be really challenging. So, there's a lot of things to consider. It's a very sacred gift. That's the thing that I really want folks to kind of come away with, that it's actually a sacred and a deeply special responsibility on this planet to be able to process the challenges that we move through every day.
I had a feeling that if we touched on this topic, that was going to be your view on the cultural sort of stigma and how young girls are isolated from their family around this. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's also my view. And I said so with Amos, who's doing wonderful work in Ghana. And I said, perhaps we need to change the way we look at that isolation. Perhaps it's not such a terrible thing. The challenge then comes in where it's made to feel like it's some kind of a punishment. But if we somehow find the way to start to control the narrative and start to control the emotions around that time and start to empower girls to feel differently about it, to change their perspective, then perhaps we might get to a point, Saran, where they do feel about that isolation the way you do, and it's not such a such a depressive state, or we'll keep to the same word, such an isolated state. Because if you have it like the red tent with the supporting mom and the supporting auntie and everybody taking care of you during that time, then it does turn into a beautiful thing, into a sacred thing. But if you're kind of shoved into like a back room somewhere and you're just told you can't participate with the rest of the family because you're unclean, then that's a different energy and that's a different perception that I think we need to start to change that narrative up. But I was like, if we touch on this, I've got a feeling the way Saran feels about energies and menstruation, that this is going to be her viewpoint. So it was so interesting that you said that. You mentioned,
I think we just got a little twisted, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not the isolation, it's the way that you're framing that, the narrative, as you mentioned, because that the deep wisdom that can come out of that time, that is going to actually help you as you start a new cycle. So we get to start over so many times. They say no because there's we have less children, and we're not breastfeeding, as many children as our ancestors were, or my grandmother on my dad's side had 11 children. So, you know, she would have had less menstrual cycles than I do, or I will. They say the average person is going to have 400 menstrual cycles, right? As opposed to back in the day when people were having 20 children, they were maybe having 20 cycles, because between having the children and breastfeeding, you know, it's less. So we have a lot more challenges in the world. So we have a lot more opportunities to work through this with every cycle. So you actually get the opportunity to start anew every month, right? So you take the wisdom and everything, all the things that you learned when you're in that sort of challenging time, right? What are you noticing? What came up? Why did it come up? Is this a recurring theme? How can you now move the ball forward? What intentions are you going to set? There's a lot of sacred ritual and things like that that you can do. You can make this time very special for you. You can set intentions for the cycle, right? This next cycle, this is what I've learned from the previous one. This is what I'm moving forward. Let's see where I land by the end of this cycle. And then you do that. You know, you're always expanding and growing in a really beautiful way. It is not linear. It is like unfolding like a flower, like blossoming, right? So really seeing your growth and your place on this planet as more as of a blossoming and expanding, just as the universe. We are a microcosm of the universe, really.
Again, beautiful, flowery words that are going to stay with me, I feel, for the rest of my life. Just the positivity that comes from you and your perspective on how we should be treating our cycles, I really think is just so empowering. I am already personally just listening to you and going, I need to start seeing my cycle that way. I need to start taking it as an opportunity to start anew and to start afresh, because we really don't live in a linear anything. Our lives are not linear. The world we live in is not linear, and certainly not the environments that we interact in. So it's strange that we've come to think about our cycles actually as a linear thing. We've almost kind of put it like we've parked it on a bench somewhere and said, okay, this is something I'm going to go through every month, and it's a nuisance. And I like the way you're talking about it, and you are forcing us to reflect on it, because you're making us kind of go, no, take it off that park bench, bring it here. Like, bring it here. This is a sacred time for you. This is a beautiful time for you. And this is your opportunity. And I love that you keep saying that word. You keep saying it in your answers. I don't know if you hear yourself, but I hear you. That, that it is an opportunity for you to start anew, to start to love yourself, and to really start to appreciate what your body is going through. You know, in your previous answer, you mentioned all the emotions that we kind of go through when we're on our cycle that we should be aware of. But one of those that you mentioned was fear. And I hope you allow me to kind of unpack this question for me so that it can come out of my head, hopefully the way it's intended. But I mean, power, control, and freedom, those are often the words that we wish we could use to describe our cycle, but not just our cycle, our lived experience as women, right? And when you said fear, that stood out for me. And I don't know if you saw my face, but it did. That word fear stood out for me so much, because I think to myself, as a woman living in this world, how often we are in a state of fear. And, you know, with my history as well with sexual abuse, that is something that never leaves my mind. I'm constantly aware of where I am, who I'm with. And now that I have children, I feel like that is just like escalated. It's exponential, right? My son this year turned 4, which was the age I turned when I was first abused. And my emotions and my anxiety were on like an all-time high, because all I'm thinking about is I just have to be aware and I have to be there, because if I can get him to 5 years old, then like I've succeeded. Then hopefully we've kept them, you know, from experiencing what I experienced. And I think it's important to note this. And I'm not saying at all, I'm really not, and I hope nobody misunderstands this comment at all. I'm not saying that men don't feel or experience fear. But what I'm saying is the level of fear that women experience is different. It's a consistent kind of fear, right? Men can go and jog without worrying about it. They can jog at 10 o'clock at night and not worry. They can go to a bar and not necessarily worry or carry activated charcoal in their bag just in case they're roofied during the night. There's just a certain level of freedom that they live, in their day-to-day life that we don't experience. And I want to know from you just how impactful that level or that feeling of fear is as we're trying to gain control back, as we're trying to feel a lot more positive, a lot more empowered. How can we use our cycles to our advantage during that time when it sounds like we actually should be a lot self-aware and a lot more attuned to what we're going through and what we're feeling?
So the menstrual cycle can really help you to work through some of those traumas, for sure. And in my experience with the women that I've worked with, the ones who have the most spiritual sensitivity, the ones who have the most challenges in terms of mood with their menstrual cycle are ones who have had a sexual abuse experience. And that can lead to a lot of feelings, as you mentioned, of powerlessness, especially if you didn't feel, that feeling of safety was not there, And when you are very young and you don't have that sense of safety, you feel powerless, that can really manifest. The thing that comes up a lot in that premenstrual phase can be those feelings of powerlessness again, right? It might be in different clothing, it might be with a boss, it might be with a partner, it might be, with a friend or something like that. It might be wearing different clothes, but the root, if you go back, is that original sense of powerlessness when you did not feel protected, you didn't feel safe. And so those feelings can really come up in a super amplified way. And it's like, I don't understand why this is happening. I don't understand why I'm feeling this way. And there's a lot of different techniques, which is why I mentioned the holistic perspective, right? Because if there's not an understanding of what the root cause is, then you don't get the actual real treatment that you necessarily need, okay? And some of this work is not easy, because all of the things that I mentioned to you before about the fact that emotions live in the body, they're not meant to, but when you are a 4-year-old, when you're 5, 10, whatever age, you don't necessarily have the tools to work through the emotion of fear in the moment, right? So when you're in the moment of trauma, you don't necessarily have everything that you need to work that through, right? So your body gives you opportunities to do that. So it will sometimes give you signals like pain. It will show up as pain, pelvic pain. Oftentimes it shows up as menstrual cramps, severe to the point where you can't get out of bed because it wants you to pay attention. Hey, I still have some things here that you haven't dealt with, right? So these are some of the ways that your body shows you, and it manifests that I need you to really sit with me. What would, I need comfort. That young person still needs comfort and protection, right? So it can be really challenging, but these things really require some support. And I really love the idea of, going back to your point, yes, the isolation, but the support with it, so that you can work through these things, I'm so sorry. I see the tears, and I know, like, this conversation can be really triggering and it can be really challenging. There's a lot of emotions that always come up, and typically, there's certain things that I would do to kind of make sure that you feel held and safe. So I apologize if that was like really triggering for you. But also very important that you brought it up.
Yeah, no, I think you triggered me when you said that we don't necessarily always have the coping mechanisms at different early stages of our life to deal with whatever it is we're dealing with and to deal with trauma. And I think what actually triggered me was when you mentioned just the triggers that your body gives you, from heavy menstrual flows to pain, and how we need to be so aware of that. And I also apologize. I'm so sorry that I'm crying.
Please don't ever apologize, because emotions are not meant to.
Yeah, you mentioned we need to let them flow. But I am in the middle of an interview, so I do need to get a whole handle on this quickly so we can continue. But yeah, it really resonated with me because I struggled with heavy cycles. And I think, as you said it, in that moment, there was a connection to that for me. But also, and as I'm learning, I mean, it took me 15 years to really talk openly about the level of abuse that I've experienced in my life. And it took 9 years before I even decided to walk into a therapist's room and discuss this. And I'm finding so often that different things trigger it, right? But this moment wasn't really a sad moment. It really was a beautiful moment because I felt a connection to my body that I previously didn't necessarily understand. And now it's kind of making a lot more sense to me because I am trying to heal myself holistically. And I am trying to make sure that I'm aligned and I'm in balance. And funny enough, that has really made an impact in my cycle. So for you to say that, it just brought this like connection that, oh my goodness, I really was experiencing a lot of pain.
Okay.
And
It's okay.
And I'm not anymore. That's a beautiful thing to know and to understand about yourself as well, that the healing journey that you're going through is working, that the time and the effort and the energy to keep facing the traumas and talking about it and really fighting for your health, that it is worth it. So these really are like happy tears. Just give me a second. I'm sorry, around. Oh, you said not to apologize, of course.
Don't apologize, because energy is meant to move out of your body. And I want to give you an example, of how much we need to kind of normalize this, because this is actually okay. This is perfect, in fact. In the wild, and I just watched this video, I think last night or night before, there's a group of scientists and they want to study a polar bear. And they're in a helicopter and they're kind of like the polar bear is running really quick, fast. And they are able to tranquilize the polar bear from the helicopter, and they go and they do their experiments and whatever, or study. And then when the polar bear starts to wake up, it starts to shake violently. You see this polar bear, huge animal, shaking. What is that shaking? That shaking is the energy, the emotion, the intensity of the adrenaline, right? So being chased created a lot of energy. You're in fight or flight. And many of us, when we've experienced any type of traumatic experience, we're in fight, flight, or freeze. We're just survival is what is most important, right? So when that experience is done, what animals do when they're triggered or they're in fight or flight, they have to shake it off. That energy, right? So it looks like that vigorous shaking, right? Or if somebody's in a car accident, sometimes you notice they're shaking, right? This is all energy. This is all emotion that really is meant to
leave the body.
But what ends up happening is we have this amazing brain, and the brain will say, not, you know, Quincy, you shouldn't be crying right now because you have an interview. That's, you shouldn't be doing that. But like, that's actually what you're supposed to be doing. It is actually what is your body's natural response to feeling an emotion. It's supposed to, we express emotions like joy through crying or laughing. We experience sadness through tears as well. So all of it is meant to happen, but we have amazing brains. You know, that this sets us apart from animals in this sense, because the polar bear isn't like, oh, this is not a good time shaking like this. They don't have the, it just is a natural body response. And then they're able to move on with their life. Oh, that was something, right? But we don't do that. We try to put it off. We say, okay, I can't feel this right now. I'm in the middle of a business meeting. I can't cry right now. And then we think it just disappears. It doesn't disappear. It's just it lives in your body. And so that's why sometimes when you do certain body work, like acupuncture or yoga even, especially yin yoga, I talk about yin yoga all the time, you'll be in a pose for like 3 minutes and just spontaneously start crying because it's in your body. The emotion, you're like, where did that come from? Those are the tears you didn't cry in the meeting 3 weeks ago, right? So the body is constantly, there's a book called The Body Holds a Score. It really does.
I think, you know, freedom is such an important topic in what I do, whether it's with this work that we're trying to do with this campaign, or whether it's with my work through Hello Coach K. I'm constantly talking about giving other women and other girls the same opportunity that I had to build their own life and to live in freedom. And I hope that those that were watching this today experienced just a little bit of that sense of freedom, and that they will use the session and the information that you've given to do that, to try and help them really understand exactly what's going on through your body. I hope they reach out to you and just find out more about your programs and what you do to help them release that level of energy, because to live free is crucial and it's so important. And I think, you know, with this campaign that we're doing now, our hope and our aim is that we can give each girl that we're targeting a little bit of that freedom by keeping them in school. And I know, you know, with the conversations that we've had, you've mentioned how you actually had just such an amazing experience at school with your cycle, and how you didn't have to miss school because there was so much support around you. And unfortunately, not every girl has that level of support and has that level of you see, I'm still emotional. They don't have that level of, you know, products or support or information or even facilities, right? But for you in your line of work, I don't know if you've ever come across this, because you might deal more with grown women than you do with girls. But in your experience in seeing this gap that's there, how important is it to keep girls into school and to give them that springboard or that foundation to just grab a hold of their own little piece of freedom?
So I don't want to like age myself saying what I'm about to say, but you know, as I mentioned to you before, for me, I'm sure I've missed some school, but it wasn't like you know, all the time. And even on the days that it was challenging and I was at school, I felt supported because we had a nurses like a sick bay, they would call it in Jamaica, right? And I went to an all-girls Catholic school. So like everybody was going through the same thing at some point in the month. And because there's so many girls, people's cycles were syncing together. So, you know, friend groups, it was like, wow.
That's actually funny.
Yeah. So even if you didn't feel well, you could just tell your teacher. It's not, nobody was forcing you, right, to feel okay. If you don't feel okay, you don't feel okay. Like you don't feel, you have low energy, you have low energy. You feel you're having cramps, you're having cramps. So we always had beds sometimes there weren't enough beds, so it would be two of us on a bed. But you know, we would get hot water bottles, and we used to get Baralgin. That was the drug of choice that the nurse would give us at the time. And you know, there would be fans blowing. You could sleep, you could take a rest.
That sounds amazing, honestly. Like that level of support at school level sounds incredible.
I know they don't have that now, but
No.
I know, well, I can't say they don't have it now at the school I went to in Jamaica, but I'm saying living in Canada, I've never heard about that. But if we were feeling not well, there's an opportunity to rest, and then you can go back to class. You take a 1 hour, an hour and a half, whatever it is, and then you can go back to class. I think if we had more of that support, right? So you don't necessarily feel like you're going to be behind because of anything, and you can always, you know, catch up. Your friend will take notes for you or whatever. It just feels more like everybody understood. So it wasn't detrimental to your education. And obviously there's always pads, there was always everything that you needed, even if you had because we wore white uniforms. So, you know,
That's amazing.
Yeah, inevitably you're gonna have that happen. But there was special soap, you know. The nurse would give you soap, and then you would go and you would wash your skirt out and let it dry in the fan. So it never really came across as something that was going to inhibit your education in any way, because you could still be at school, you could still function. And I think if we're thinking about it from that perspective, if we're saying, well, how are the schools accommodating? Do they have the menstrual hygiene products? Do they have you know, support for pain if the girls are in a lot of pain? Do they have beds? Do they have all of these things that can really support? Again, it wasn't they actually had to expand. I remember they ended up having a big expanding the nurses area because it was small and there was not a lot of beds at first. But you know, if you have that kind of support for young girls, then it makes the experience very different. You know, barring that, I don't. It's hard if a young woman is living quite a distance from school, right? And she's in pain, she's feeling low energy. I do firmly believe that she should not be forced to go, you know, in that case, if she doesn't, you know. But what are the supports that can come in place now? Can someone get her school things? Can she work on something at home that is, you know, that's going to still support her education? What are the supports in place for that, rather than forcing you to go to school where you don't have the support and you're feeling not great? You're not going to be learning. Your brain is not actually even primed to do what it's meant to do anyway.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something to consider for sure.
I think that's actually so important. And I'm noting that down as well, because, you know, it's not just about, and it's key, it's not just about whether or not they even have the right products or the sustainable products, but whether or not they have the right level of support. And I think that's so important. And we will definitely keep that in mind as well. You know, we are a young organization and we're really trying to make sure that the support that we're giving and the help we're giving is, to use your word, holistic, right? That it is all round support and that it's the right kind of support for each and every single girl. I think it's really important, like you mentioned, that if she's not in a state to go to school, it's not about forcing her, but there should be levels of support to ensure that her educational experience is not deterred in any way, it's not inhibited in any way, that she still has an opportunity to catch up if that's what it takes, to retake tests if that's what it takes, you know, but just to make sure that her educational experience is not interrupted at all. Saran, thank you so much for your time. That is it for our interview today. I mean, you have just dropped so many bombs on us today. I'm sure I'm still going to be going back and watching this interview time and time and time again. We would love to have you back again, like I mentioned, to talk about the cycles of a period, but most likely we'll also talk about how we can start to heal through our traumas and just listen more to our body, because I think that's really important. I think there is no more that I can add. There's no more I can take away from what you've said. I just want what you've said to land um, on everybody watching or who is going to be watching and listening to this. The last thing I can ask from you is just to let everybody at home know how they can get a hold of you if they want to, how they can follow you, how can they get into your yoga if that's what you're doing, and any of your material, if there's material that we can start to read up on, that we can start to educate ourselves on as well, and just empower our own menstrual cycle experience.
Okay, so there's a few ways you can reach me. My website is www.wellnessbysaran.com. And there you can find everything related to my offerings, one-on-one coaching. I also do group workshops and things of that nature for organizations and businesses, helping organizations become more period positive. And also I have a virtual learning space. So I have a 4-week course called Inner Seasons, and it really goes into great depth around eating for your menstrual cycle. So the foods to support each phase of your cycle, herbs, natural medicines, all, and really kind of gives you the 101 of what's happening. And then also the energetic part, the healing opportunities that go through, that moves through the cycle, cultivating sexual energy as well, because, you know, libido is all part of that, manifesting, really planning your life around your menstrual cycle. So that 4-week course is jam-packed. There's recipe guides in there, there's herbal guides, and really a lot of great exercises to implement to support the emotional well-being as well. Every quarter we offer scholarships for this. So I would love for anyone watching to absolutely apply to the scholarships. You can also find me on Instagram. It's wellness_by_Saran. And if you go to the link in my bio there's a period personality quiz to give you a little bit more insight around your menstrual, your period. And then there is the scholarship link as well for those who would like to take the course, but maybe due to economic hardship, they're not able to. So that's a little bit about where you can find me and the resources available.
Thank you for watching this episode of our series, The Voice of Champions. If you also want to make an impact and become a Million Girls Champion, then visit our website at amilliongirlsfoundation.org and help us keep 1 million girls in school.